Thank you, sir, and thank you, Dr. Jasudha, for inviting me to share the small experience that I have in this. As has been said already today, that mostly definitions and outcomes of vascular access have been given, and this was re-emphasized by the North American Vascular Access Consortium in 2011. Most of the definitions and outcomes were given by radiologists and vascular access surgeons. And what they did, while I am not going to read through all the definitions, what they have done is to now try to unify the definitions being used with regard to failing vascular access, giving a nephrological basis to some of them as well. For instance, they have talked about early and late dialysis suitability failure, in that what they do stress is that a vascular access is successful, a fistula is deemed successful not if it can be punctured, but if it can be used for 2/3 or more of all dialysis for a period of 1 month and delivers the prescribed dialysis in the given time frame. They have also removed the term fistulogram, replacing it with angiogram, stressing that in an angiogram, while the DSA is the gold standard, it must look not only at the fistula but at the anastomosis, the superficial and deep venous systems, and also the central veins when evaluating what they call the vascular access circuit. They have included, when talking about success, not just an anatomic or a radiographic success, but a clinical success, which again allows 2/3 of runs in the month after an intervention to be completed successfully, and a functional success. The problem, the major loss of vascular access is thrombosis, and almost always a vascular access thrombosis when there is an underlying undetected stenosis. The problem is more acute with AV grafts, but also can arise with AV fistulas. And our own Indian Society of Hemodialysis in 2012 stressed in the guideline that fistula and graft stenosis should be investigated by angiograms. While ultrasonography is an alternative, it is operator dependent and may read collateral veins in some cases. In 2007, Svetlana Kacharova gave the components of a comprehensive vascular access care as including the physical examination to recognize dysfunction and then going on to specialized tests and intervention to correct the malfunction. When I looked in 2014 at what was happening in our own unit, we would like to do a physical examination of the vascular access in all hemodialysis sessions, but it actually gets done in about 60%, mainly by nurses. Most of our patients, however, do get a complete evaluation once a month at the OPD. We document blood flow rates and venous pressures to look at trends in all patients at all sessions. If a patient has repeated session interruption, is getting underdialyzed and recently very negative pre-pump pressures, then we use the hematocrit dilution technique to measure the flow in the access. I've recently started doing ultrasound Dopplers of vascular access only for about the last 1 year, and then we take patients up for angiograms. We do the angiogram using a 5F, or if we are we can change it to a 6F sheet if we are planning to do an angioplasty. I usually puncture the fistula vein, wind a blood pressure cuff and allow the contrast to regurgitate across the anastomosis in order to evaluate the anastomosis, then follow it through the entire forearm and arm and the central veins for a complete picture. In some situations where the arm may be so swollen or because of venous hypertension from a central venous stenosis, it may be necessary to use the femoral arterial axis to get to the brachial artery and evaluate a fistula. And I classified the lesions based on a surgical classification which was published in the NDT. For fistulas, a type 1 lesion is an anastomotic stenosis, a type 2 lesion is a needling segment or a draining vein in stenosis, and type 3 is a central venous stenosis. In our unit, in the last 5 years, 78 patients have undergone 85 fistulograms. The average time at which fistulas developed dysfunction was about 8 months after they had been used for dialysis. And while we could try to send most of the patients immediately, there was on average a time period of about 15 days delay in picking this up. The large majority were radiocephalic fistulas, followed by brachiocephalic. 2 transposed basilic veins and 8 saphenous vein grafts. The commonest indication was an inability to obtain blood flow with 16 or inadequate blood flow with 16 gauge needles, increased venous pressure under dialysis, sudden arm swelling due to central venous stenosis in some cases, the appearance of chest wall, and recently an increased notice, since we taught nurses not to wind tourniquets after the dialysis, a prolonged bleeding after needle removal is an indication of a stenosis. When I classified the lesions, the largest number were what Volker Mickley called type 2 lesions, that is lesions which were either in the needling segment of the forearm vein or in the first 3 centimeters of the cephalic vein after a radiocephalic anastomosis, and 22 out of the 85 fistulas had more than one lesion. Now, this is one of such examples. This is the radial artery. Soon after the anastomosis, there is a narrowing. There is a small segment of vein which looks good, and then there is another narrowing here, and then the fistula vein is more than 6 mm here. Now, this is the sort of fistula which I would not attempt to go in for a percutaneous intervention. The radial artery is itself atherosclerotic here. The fistula has a long segment with multiple stenotic lesions and then a dilatation. And this one is even worse. The radial artery is narrow, it does not have much of a flow in it. Immediately after the anastomosis, there is a stenosis, then there is a dilated segment, then there is another stenosis, then an aneurysmal dilatation, and then a complete cutoff of flow. This is a brachiocephalic AVF, and there is a tight stenosis in the mid-arm. Now, the Doppler reported this fistula as having a flow of 587 mL per minute. The reason being, deep collateral veins carried the flow from the AV fistula and diverted it higher up near the shoulder, and this is the vein that the Doppler read, and this flow was obviously good, but it was through unusable veins, and that is the result. After an angioplasty, the collateral veins have disappeared, the resistance has reduced here, and the flow, the entire flow is through the fistula vein, which could then be used successfully for dialysis. This is the this is a brachiocephalic fistula again, and this is the commonest lesion according to the literature which brachiocephalic fistulas develop. The cephalic arch vein at its entry point into the subclavian, the entry is acute to begin with, and it develops a severe stenosis here, and this is a region which cannot be palpated. It is deep, it is under the clavicle and just at the entry point to the subclavian, and it is about 6 millimeters long. Right. This is a study which looked at the relative incidence. It was published in Radiology in 2006 in 151 dysfunctional fistulas and tried to look at what was the relative incidence. Now, this was in diagnostics. They used a 4F radial access catheter and then carried out angioplasties by replacing it obviously with a larger catheter. A 6F is the minimum which will take a balloon. What they found was in radiocephalic AV fistulas, the commonest lesion was the proximal cephalic vein in the forearm, which 64% of fistulas stenosed over there. And when they went to brachiocephalic, it was the picture which I showed earlier, the cephalic arch vein where it empties into the subclavian. 30% of brachiocephalics would stenose at that point. Now, this study looked at the value of ultrasound Doppler, and although it showed excellent diagnostic accuracy, as our own guidelines, the Indian Society guidelines said, it's operator dependent. Only recently I started doing my own Dopplers. Before that, when we depended on others, I had Doppler ultrasounds in 19 of the 85 patients on whom I did fistulograms. The Doppler correctly identified the lesion in about 68%. It had 3 false positives. The fistulas were normal when submitted to angiograms. It could not, if there was a single lesion, it often could not pick up multiple lesions distal to that. It reported an incorrect site in 2 patients, and I showed the picture where the Doppler read the collateral vein flow. If we are to intervene, then there are some prerequisites. In intervention, percutaneous intervention is minimally invasive. It's now fairly safe. How effective? There are a lot of studies to show that. Most important, it preserves subsequent veins rather than sending the patient for a fresh fistula which would use up a new site at that point of time. K-Doki recommends that an intervention in a fistula with more than 50% stenosis in either the venous or arterial outflow should, in conjunction with clinical or physiological anomalies, should be treated with an angioplasty. What sites should be subjected to angioplasty? Now, this is a consensus by an interventional radiologist, Luke Tamil Rodrigues, and a surgeon, Volker Mickley. Anastomotic stenosis, surgical creation of a new anastomosis. Isolated stenosis of a radiocephalic fistula in a lower forearm will often, well, surgical results are superior. Needling segment, primary balloon dilatation is good, but a venous patch reconstruction may be required if it fails or there is recurrent stenosis. Long or multiple stenosis, bypass with the great saphenous vein or in PTFE graft. Junctional stenosis, PTA, central veins dilatation, graft venous outflow by primary balloon dilatation. And all of those guidelines have been re-emphasized by the European best practice guidelines on vascular access. What the EBPG says is recurring stenosis can be treated radiologically, but that may mean plasting a fistula up to every 3 months. A stent may help in such situations, but mainly both K-Doki and EBPG say the stents would be useful if there are PTA induced ruptures not controllable by protracted balloon inflation, and in some cases where the lesion is surgically inaccessible or there is a contraindication to surgery or a recurrence within a 3-month period may also help. When I looked at my 78 patients, 20 of them agreed to plasties and went through with it. 30 of them switched over to tunnel catheters. 12 went through surgical revision. 5 of them had new fistulas created, and 3 where there was a thrombus, there was pharmacological thrombolysis attempted. I passed a balloon, dilated them with a balloon after using either a 0.014 or for peripheral veins and a glide wire 0.035 for the central veins. Started with a 2 mm balloon, went up to 6 mm progressively for peripheral veins and up to 12 mm for a subclavian vein. I went up to 20 atmosphere pressures. I don't have a conquest balloon which goes up to 30 atmosphere pressures. Placed stents where there was an elastic recoil or a recurrent stenosis. They were all bare metal stents, and we defined the absence of residual stenosis with a return of the bruit and thrill which was absent during the procedure, and the ability to obtain more than 250 ml per minute or more than 300 ml per minute in the next dialysis after the procedure. And we assessed the survival of the fistulas after the process by the Kaplan-Meier method. Now, there were 20 patients, as I said, who went through. Most of them, 10 of them had type 2 stenosis, so forearm needling segment or forearm proximal segment. There were 3 central veins, and there were 2 patients who had mixed stenosis. Of the fistulas, the commonest type which went in for percutaneous intervention were radiocephalic, followed by brachiocephalic. I could successfully intervene in 17 out of the 20 patients. In 2 central veins, there was chronic thrombotic occlusion and no guide wire would cross in those. This is the cephalic arch which I showed earlier. This is a 0.035 Teflon coated guide wire which has been passed through a sheath in the fistula vein. That's the waist which I had to dilate. First, this was a 5 mm balloon, not so good. Used a 6 mm balloon and the waist is there. So, this balloon had to be inflated 3 times with slight movement there, and that is the final result. And the thrill returned on table, and the fistula has now survived 8 months, giving flows of more than 300. This is a particularly tight stenosis here. This is the radial artery anastomosis, and there is a very tight stenosis here. In fact, when I had to reattempt this procedure because the sheath initially slipped out, when I came in the retrograde direction, flow would not go there. But based on the previous image, I was able to pass a coronary guide wire across it. And the guide wire went up into the radial artery across the anastomosis. And this is a dilatation at 18 atmospheres pressure. There is still a waist, and it disappeared at 20 atmospheres. And that was the end result. This fistula now gives us 350 ml with 16 gauge needles and has been used for the last 6 months. This is the one I had shown earlier. a long segment. The guide wire crossed using a guiding catheter and then went into the radial arch, dilated. So it had to be dilated in multiple points with the same balloon, and that was the final result. Today, I would refer this to the vascular access surgeon, but this was 2009. There's a stenosis there. There's a very tight stenosis here. In 2009, neither my surgeon nor the patient was willing to go through with a surgery. I dilated this with a balloon up to 20 atmospheres pressure, and there was still more than 30% residual stenosis. So the cardiologist and I put in a stent, and this fistula has survived for 5 years now without a restenosis. This is a subclavian vein. I had to go through with an arterial catheter from the femoral artery up to the brachial, because this arm was so swollen we could neither palpate nor see either arteries or veins. The axillary vein was 6.5 millimeters. The stenotic segment of the subclavian was 3 millimeters, and then this segment was about 9 millimeters beyond it. Using a guiding catheter, we put in a 0.035 wire across it, dilated it up to 8 millimeters, and that was the final result. And today the arm swelling disappeared within 48 hours, and we could use the fistula after that. When we looked at what was happening to these patients, prior to detecting dysfunction, we were getting a mean flow on dialysis of 251 roughly. At the time of dysfunction, the flow had dropped to as an average of about 150, and immediately after intervention, it went up again, and the average life of these fistulas after intervention has been about a year, and follow-up is still going on. And this is the study I mentioned earlier from radiology. They noted a clinical success of 98% and an anatomic success of around 90%. We had 3 complications. 2 of them were minor, in which the sheet slipped out, and I had to, and one it was at the end of the procedure, in the other we had to postpone the procedure. This is probably the worst complication. I was using a guiding catheter, and you can see here the tip of the guiding catheter broke, and to my horror it sailed away along the guide wire. And my cardiologist colleague told me, put in a 2 mm balloon, which we did, brought the balloon there and inflated it partially to catch that tip of the catheter, pulled it back there, and then pulled it all the way out through the 80 centimeter sheath which was in the SVC, and then we had to start the procedure all over again. Last of all, I looked at what was happening to these patients in whom we had intervened. Now, in the first 9 months, those patients who had opted to go, or whom we had gone to cuff tunnel catheters because of multiple fistular dysfunctions, they did better, more than 95. But after a year, the catheters dropped sharply, and their survival goes down to about 65%. We lost some of, due to early elastic recoil, we lost some fistula, and then the patient wouldn't go for a second procedure. So in the first year, but after about a year, then there was a good stability till about 2 years. About 65 to 70% of the fistulas post intervention survived till 2 years, and then stabilized out up to about 3.5 years, which is where the Kaplan. And of course, the worst result was in patients who only had a thrombolysis. Only 1 out of 3 succeeded. And this is from the other study, which showed that post intervention radiocephalic fistulas do significantly better than brachiocephalic. If I had to summarize, access stenosis predisposes to underdialysis, thrombosis, temporary catheter use, and access loss eventually. Physical examination detects the dysfunction early. Doppler is operator dependent. Fistulograms will reveal multiple lesions, and as Dr. Rajapurkar mentioned earlier, you can tackle them at the same sitting and percutaneously. Balloon angioplasty is successful in forearm, arm and central veins. Anastomotic lesions are best treated surgically, and the contribution of preemptive therapy still needs large randomized trials. As in other parts of nephrology, what I have done is to do something which sounded intuitively good and then learnt along the way. I am very grateful to a number of people, especially 2 of my teachers. Dr. Rajapurkar got me interested in intervention. Dr. Wadia, my current head of department, backs me in every new idea that I want to do, no matter how mad it sounds. The cardiologist who taught me a few tricks of the trade. The 2 surgeons without whose presence I wouldn't have had the courage to start intervening, and our whole nephrology team. Thank you.